And then if you don't mind, Martin's going to be asking all the questions, but because I'm the way that I am, I'm going to stay here and mind the camera to make sure that we record throughout.
Sure. So if I want to do a break, I'll just go like this.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, good morning. My name is Martin Ehring. I am in Naperville, Illinois. It is Sunday, July 22nd, and I'm here with Harvey to do an interview for the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress. Harvey, would you go ahead and state your full name, please?
My full name is Harvey Phillip Pratt.
And your tribal affiliation?
I am enrolled with the Cheyenne and the Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma, and I am part Sioux.
What was your highest rank achieved in the military?
I was a Lance Corporal.
And what branch of the military did you serve in?
United States Marine Corps.
Talking a little bit about your personal self, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in El Reno, Oklahoma, and I grew up there, and I went to St. Patrick's Indian Mission through high school in Anadarko, Oklahoma.
What did your parents do for a living?
My father had a paint company, and he died early. In fact, we buried him on my birthday. I was 8 or 9, and my mother worked in a TB sanitarium before my father died, so she could be with him. And she was a dry cleaner. She did dry cleaning and was a traditional storyteller.
How much exposure did you have to your native language and culture growing up?
We had quite a bit because I was raised by my grandfather and my mother's aunt, and they were all born in the 1880s or late 70s. But since we were Arapahoes and Cheyennes, we had a lot of those people spoke those languages, and we would get them all mixed up. We didn't know, so we learned a little bit of Cheyenne, a little bit of Arapaho, but it wasn't a lot. We were never fluent. You know, we could understand them when they talked to us about certain things, and we could say certain things, but we were never fluent.
Were you drafted or did you volunteer for the military?
I volunteered.
And what was your family's reactions?
My mother, when I told my mother that I had joined the Marine Corps, I call it the silent scream because her mouth fell open and she just had that look on her face and she started crying. And I never really understood that until later. It was her brother, her younger brother was in the Marine Corps and he served in the Second World War. And he was missing in action 2 different times. He had been wounded several times and had been bayoneted, and so they had a really hard time, you know, with him being in the Marine Corps. And so when I told my mother that I was going to join the Marine Corps, I realized that that's what she thought. She thought that's going to happen to my son, you know. I think that was the reaction my mother had, but I didn't really understand it at that time until a little bit later.
And other family members?
My brothers didn't want me to go. My brothers didn't want me to go. My sisters by then were already grown and were somewhere else, and so I didn't have a lot of my grandfather was still alive. And I got a story about him a little bit later on after I got out of the service. But for the most part, we always revered or thought well of veterans, you know. So it didn't. I wasn't really concerned about anything.
So we talk about your early days in service. Where did you undergo basic training?
At San Diego, and I got hurt in basic training at the rifle range, and I qualified. I didn't qualify, but I was on the range with an M1. I was one of the last platoons that shot the M1, and the drill instructor came by and he checked my sling, and he thought it was too slack, and he tightened it up, and when he did, he pinched a nerve in my left arm right here, and it paralyzed my left arm. My left arm was paralyzed. I couldn't pick up anything, and so from the rifle range, they sent me back to the headquarters to be retrained and recover, and they put me in a dog catcher's pickup, the wire cage in the back. They put me in there, and it's raining, and I'm sitting there in the rain with a paralyzed arm, and I'm thinking, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. I'm left-handed. My left arm is paralyzed. I'm in the rain, and they gave me my orders. They gave me my orders, and I opened it up to see what was in there, and it said, Private Pratt's going to be a good Marine. And that's it. That's what really kind of made me, suck it up and say, I'm going to be fine. It's going to be good. They think I'm going to be a good Marine. That's what I want to be. So that little note in those orders pulled me through. I stayed in the hospital for about a month, and then they sent me back to the range, and I had to start all over again because we were three weeks at the range, I think, and this time they handed me an M14. See, so I was one of the first guys with an M14, one of the last guys with the M1, and so then I when I graduated from boot camp, I was made a private first class. I was one of them. They do 5 every platoon, and I was one of them. So I felt pretty good about where I was at that point, since I had a little rank out of that, coming out of that. So.
Do you have a vivid memory from basic training that you remember?
Yeah, I remember my drill instructor falling off one of the towers, and when he hit the ground, he just bounced right up like it never hurt him. And then when we were doing bayonet training, since I was a platoon, had one of the squads, and I was talking to some of our guys, and the drill instructor threw his stick at me and hit me with it. And then he had me come up on the platform, and he used me as a dummy as to what to do. So he would jab me and hit me and butt stroke me, and and I remember I was so mad there was nothing I could do about it, that this guy was using me as a punching bag, as what you should do.
How did you get through it mentally and physically?
Well, I grew up in a boarding school, so I was used to sleeping in those kind of environment with bunks, and had to make your bed every day and clean up stuff, So to me, that was just pretty much it. It didn't bother me so much doing that sort of stuff. But I had growing up, as children, we were taught to be warriors. My grandpa had us do all sorts of things, that we did, and so to me it wasn't as hard as a lot of people. A lot of people really suffered, and to me it's pretty much like going to boarding school.
Which boarding school did you go to?
I went to St. Patrick's Indian Mission.
Okay, and where is that?
In Anadarko, Oklahoma.
Okay, for what years did you go?
I went through high school.
Okay,
from 9th through the 12th grade, and Geronimo was baptized there at that old school, that old mission. So I really, that kind of environment didn't bother me so much. It was just like going to boarding school to me, except, you couldn't smoke whenever you wanted to,
Were there any community experiences or cultural values growing up that prepared you for the military lifestyle?
Yeah, I think so. We, like I said, my grandfather kind of, he would say, he said, did you learn how to go without water? So he gave us a little smooth rock. He said, you put this rock in your mouth. He said, make your own water. So I always carried a little smooth rock around with me, what you want. And then we'd carry dry meat. We'd carry a piece of dry meat because we lived down in a small town. We were always out in the country. And we'd carry dry meat with us, and you could actually break it up, pound it up into a powder, and you could put that in your mouth, and you could make your own gravy, with your saliva, and you could make a little gravy, and we'd eat that dry meat, carry that rock around, and we'd do it without water. So when I was I always had water because I didn't drink it. All a lot of guys drink their water up, but I'd always have a canteen full of water or half full of water, because that's just the way we were taught, and he taught us that when you're physically hurt, you don't cry. He said, little boys don't cry. He said, you cry when someone dies, and most things like that. He said you can cry. He said, but you don't cry. He said, when you get hurt, if you get hit with a rock or something, he said, you can make the sound of the bear. So if you got hurt, that's what we'd all do. We'd all make the sound of the bear, and it was onksh, onksh. We'd do that, and so all those little kids in our neighborhood, would heard us doing those things, and so it was just, things like that we would go stay on the river for 3 and 4 days at a time, and nobody thought anything about it.
Are there any particular instructors that stand out in your mind during your time in the service?
Well, I always thought when we was in Vietnam, my lieutenant was a Hughes, Lieutenant Hughes, and then the platoon sergeant was Larson, and my platoon, my squad leader was Edwards. So I can always remember those guys. And besides, I went through boot camp with another Pratt. He was from Louisiana. We weren't related, but we had the same name, and so we were always right together. So we went through boot camp, and then we both volunteered to go to the guerrilla warfare training to go to Vietnam. And RD, he was RD Pratt, and we still stay in contact. He's one of my best friends, but he still lives in Louisiana. But those are the guys that really stand out, as far as any particular people, that.
Did you train with any other American Indian recruits?
Nope. No, I don't remember any other Indians, because when we were in what they call a staging battalion, getting ready to go overseas, my folks came out, and people realized that I was an Indian because my folks look, they look Indian, and I'm light, but I was real dark because I was in the sun all the time, and civilians either thought I was an Indian or a Mexican, and so when I had people ask me. In fact, some guys want to know if I was part black, but those are the people that I really think about as even today, because RD and I went to Vietnam together. We were in the same fire team, and RD was real technical. He knew the different types of aircraft, and he knew all the weapons. Different weapons. Even when we would pick up weapons from a fight somewhere, he'd pick up Uzis and Springfields, and he kept all those and shipped them back home. So he was real technical, and him and I, we used to say that he was a right hand and I was a left hand, because I just kind of reacted from here. I did things from here and how I felt, and he was real technical, and so we just really worked together very well, and we always did stuff together.
How was the morale in your group?
The morale, when you're in Vietnam, we were a special unit, so our morale was really high. People were really high and tight, and there was very little conflict, and everybody worked together very well. But that, like I said, is a very special unit, and we felt good about who we were and what we were doing.
Did you receive any specialized training after boot camp?
Yes, I went to the guerrilla warfare school, and when I was first sent overseas to Okinawa, I was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division Military Police, and then I volunteered. Once I was there for a couple of months, I volunteered for this other group. Okay. So we went to the guerrilla what they call a guerrilla warfare school at that time. But now it's something else.
Okay. Were you trained to operate specific equipment, including weapons, vehicles, aircraft, or radios?
Just weapons. You know, the M14 and M79 and the M60 machine gun. You know, so we were comfortable, you know, in using those basic things. You know, and I trained. We had guys in our unit that were demolition guys, and we had guys that were specialists in engineering and things like that. You know, so because we had to, a lot of times if we had to go somewhere, we had to clear an area so the helicopter could land. So we'd rappel down, and the engineers would blow trees up, and they would cut them down just like you did it with a saw, and they'd take wire and wrap it around bushes and around trees, and when they blew it up, it'd jerk up everything out of the way, and they'd clear an area for a helicopter to land in just a matter of minutes.
Can you describe what a typical training day was like?
Well, the guerrilla warfare school, you know, we had to learn about the customs, and we had to learn language, basic languages of Vietnamese, and we had to learn about punji sticks and ambushes, and how to get out of ambushes, and how to recover helicopters and blow up helicopters, and how to live out in the woods, how to live out in the jungle, and we're familiar with the animals and things like that. It was a cultural issue that they trained you in, besides training you in your action of being a reconnaissance Marine. You know, that's so.
What kind of assignments did you have?
We were assigned to protect the base, at Da Nang, and to protect the airfield, to protect the helicopters and the aircraft that came in, and we were assigned to every time that the air squadrons went out, 162 or every time they went out what they would do is they would fly Vietnamese out, and they would land them, and they would do a search for the enemy, and then we would fly out with them, and they would put us down on the ground somewhere, and then they would go, and then if something happened, they would come back and get us, and normally we would stay where they kept supplies, you know, to resupply, and then we would have to go out and either pick up somebody or recover somebody, or they would have to blow up a helicopter, something that they couldn't, you know, they didn't want anybody to get those aircraft, so they would just blow them up, to disable them. So there was four of us one time. We were at a location, and an Army helicopter came around, flew around us, and then we were with some supplies, and we didn't think anything about it. I thought, well, there's nothing wrong, you know. But he tilted down, and when he did, the rocket slid out, and it was probably 100 yards from us. But he was real low, and I asked a Marine Corps helicopter pilot friend of mine about that. I said, why didn't those rockets go off? He said, well, they didn't have time to arm themselves. He said they've got to arm themselves after a certain distance. Same with the M79. It had to be, wouldn't arm itself for about 10 feet out of the muzzle, and the cylinders spin in that 20 millimeter, and after it spins so many times, they all fall into place. And he said that's basically the same thing with those rockets. I said to me that looked like they just fell out, and he said, well, it might look that way when they first, but we couldn't figure out why was he doing that to us, you know? Because obviously he could tell that we were American troops, you know, opposed to Vietnamese troops. I don't know what happened, but it was we wouldn't go over there because I was afraid those rockets were just dead, laying there waiting to go off. So.
Did you have any promotions or extra responsibilities as your time in the military progressed?
You know, I stood an honor guard for the commandant in Vietnam. I stood an honor guard for him, and then when I came back to the States, and they shipped me to Yuma, Arizona, to an air wing, and they made me, first off, when I got there, they made me a supply clerk, and then the colonel volunteered for me to be a payroll clerk, and sent me over to payroll, and they made me a payroll clerk. And while I was there, my commander, my lieutenant, was a Mustanger, you know, and so I got along with him. He really liked me because he was a sports guy, and I played basketball and baseball while I was there, and played some football, and so he as a Mustanger, he had I don't know where I'm going with that now. I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, he volunteered to. He wanted me to go to OCS. He said, I'll send you to OCS. And I said, I want to stay in the Marine Corps. I said, but I want to get my degree. I said, I saw the difference between officers and the difference between officers and enlisted guys. And he had been in a long time, over 20 years. He was still a lieutenant as a Mustanger, you know. And I thought, I don't want that to happen to me. And I don't want to be in an office working in a payroll office or a disbursement or something like that. So I said, I'm going to get out and get my degree. That was my what I wanted to do, was to go back in, because I really liked the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm. What were your assignments or your role within your unit?
Well, we were in the second platoon, our second squad, and we rotated back and forth. One day we'd guard the compound, and then the next day you would guard the airfield, and then the third time you was on support to fly out with the air wing when they went somewhere. So they kept you busy all the time, you know, and that was just it was kind of routine. You know, I went over there weighing 180 pounds, came back weighing 149 pounds. Mm-hmm. I lost a lot of weight. I had that skin disease, that skin rot out. My skin would all swell up and crack open, and so you had, you know, it was uncomfortable. You know, you were just wet all the time, you know. And when it rained during the monsoon, your M60 would sit about this high, and it would be underwater. If you'd be totally underwater in a matter of hours. It would just, water would just come up on you, and I mean, you were just wet all the time. We always carried our muzzle down because of the rain, you know.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about where you served in Vietnam?
I served in Vietnam in I Corps, which is the northern section of South Vietnam, and we were stationed at Da Nang Air Base. Mm-hmm. And Da Nang had two different. They had the compound where they stayed, and then they had the air base. And there was about a mile difference, maybe a little more between them. And the Vietnamese guarded some areas, but they were on an outer perimeter at certain areas, and we did the base where the men slept in the headquarters, and then we did the tarmac and the airfield, you know, and helicopters and small aircraft, and the big aircraft would come in and land there, and so we guarded that area, primarily the aircraft. And RD and I were caught a guy in a Vietnamese. We caught him in messing with the helicopters in the middle of the night. We caught him, and we took him in and turned him over. And they said later that he was a sapper. And but I don't know. You know, he didn't resist us, because we would have probably killed him. You know, but we took him into custody and took him back to the camp and turned him over to our platoon sergeant, you know, and they took him off somewhere. So we didn't think any more about it, you know, didn't think any more about it. And then when we patrolled the camp there where everybody slept, if we weren't doing something, we were filling sandbags. We filled sandbags till I was sick of sandbags. We just made, if we weren't doing anything, you went out and filled sandbags. We put sandbags everywhere. And I caught a Marine crawling through the concertina wire one night. Mm-hmm. You know, and at first, when I first saw him run across the road, I thought, well, that looks like a Marine, because of the way he was dressed. And then he hit that concertina wire, and he started wiggling through it, and it was real dark, and I just walked along my shadows here. When he popped out, stopped him, you know. And I walked up close enough to him to see that he was an American, and I just let him go. You know, I didn't take him into anybody. I just let him go. You know.
What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving Vietnam?
You know, I had 3 guys that I was really close to, and 2 of them had passed away already from cancer, and then RD, and RD and I lost touch of one another after we got out, and his daughter found me. She found me online because I had done some stuff on some police shows, and they interviewed me. She recognized my name and my picture, and she called me up on the phone, and she said, "Is this Harvey Pratt?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "I'm talking to a dead man," and it pissed me off. I thought someone was threatening me, you know, because I was a police officer. And then she apologized, and she said, "No," she said, "my dad thought that you were killed," you know. And so Gene and I had, he was supposed to call me. I said, "Well, have him call me or I'll call him." And he never called me for about 3 hours, and Gene and I were eating. We were eating, and when he did call me, it was emotional.